Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of The True Crime Dish, where I dish about a true crime case while I make myself a dish. Today we're going to be making some chicken gyros. Gyros? Y'all know what I'm talking about. While we also discuss the infamous case of Michael and Kathleen Peterson, also known as the staircase murder. There has been a ton of renewed interest in this case because of the new HBO series that's coming out, or that has come out. I have not watched it yet. I wanted to research this case, get all the facts together before I watch that show. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm just going to tell you the straight facts, and you can decide for yourself what happened. It's December 9th, 2001 at 2:41 a.m. The police get a frantic phone call from a Michael Peterson saying, please hurry. My wife has fallen down the stairs. She's still breathing, but please hurry.
Durham 911, where's your emergency?
1810 Cedar Street, please.
What's wrong?
My wife's had an accident. She's still breathing.
What kind of accident?
She's down on the stairs. She's still breathing. Please come.
Is she conscious?
What?
Is she conscious?
No, she's not conscious.
Okay,
Please.
how many stairs did you
What?
fall down?
Huh?
How many stairs?
Stairs.
How many stairs? Calm down, sir. Calm down.
No, 15, 20, I don't know. Please, get somebody here right away, please.
Okay, somebody's dispatching the ambulance
No.
while I ask you questions.
It's off of, it's in Forest Hills, okay? Please.
Police are immediately dispatched to go out to 1810 Cedar Street, where the Petersons live, and immediately upon arrival, they pronounce Kathleen Peterson dead on the scene. So who were the Petersons? Who were Michael and Kathleen Peterson? Kathleen was born February 21st, 1953 in Greensboro, North Carolina, and she was an absolute go-getter her entire life. From a young age, she just excelled in everything that she did, it seemed like. In high school, she was president of the debate team, editor of the school magazine, and she still had time to take some Latin classes at a college nearby. So girl was just filling up her plate, and she was doing extremely well. She graduated as valedictorian of her class, a class of nearly 500 students, and she continued to thrive in college as well, becoming the first female to be accepted into Duke's engineering program. She's just super impressive. Kathleen graduated with her bachelor's in civil engineering, and she went on to get a master's in mechanical engineering. While she was in college, she met her first husband, Fred Atwater. They got married and they had one daughter together named Caitlin Atwater. Kathleen went on to become very successful after college. She really was a great example that women could have it all. She was super accomplished in her professional life. She also had a great home life as well, and she made sure to make time for the things that she loved to do. Like, she loved to cook. She was very into giving back to the community, so she would fundraise a lot for various charities, and she loved just spending quality time with the people that she really cared about in her life. She honestly was just such a badass. After several years of marriage, Kathleen discovered that Fred had been having an affair, so she filed for divorce from him, and that's when she would meet Michael Peterson. Michael and Kathleen met in 1986. Kathleen had her daughter named Caitlin, and Caitlin was friends with Margaret and Martha, who were Michael's adopted daughters. So the girls were all friends, and that's how Michael and Kathleen met, was through their daughters. Michael was a Marine veteran turned author. After his time spent in the Marines, he became an author, writing mostly military fiction, and he also had a column in the local Durham newspaper. He was actually bringing in pretty good money from his novels, and like I said, Kathleen was doing very well for herself, so they seemed to have a lot in common. They were both very smart and very successful. They got married the very next year in 1987 and blended the two families. So Kathleen had her daughter Caitlin, and then Michael had the two adopted daughters, Margaret and Martha, but he also had two biological sons, Clayton and Todd. So it was a full house for sure. They had 5 kids all together. But by all accounts, everyone said that they were an extremely happy family, and Kathleen and Michael had a very happy marriage. On the evening of December 8th, 2001, remember we started out this story December 9th at 2:41 in the morning, so this was the night right before. Kathleen and Michael had been out having dinner, had some wine. They came home, watched a movie, and then decided that they wanted to just have a nightcap out by the pool. So they brought some wine out there. Michael says that Kathleen took a Valium to help her relax. This was not uncommon for her. And they had some more wine by the pool. They lived in a beautiful, almost 11,000 square foot mansion style home out in Durham, North Carolina. And it was a nice night out, so they wanted to go out and enjoy their pool. After about 45 minutes outside, Kathleen decides that she wants to go inside. So she goes in and Michael stays out by the pool, and he says that he stays out there for a couple more hours with the dogs, just hanging out, enjoying his night. But whenever he decides to go inside, makes his way to the house, goes inside, he rounds the corner to go up the stairs, and that's when he sees Kathleen slumped over on the bottom step with blood everywhere. Frantic, he calls 911. Like I said earlier, the police arrive on scene and immediately pronounce Kathleen dead. And that's when the cops noticed the copious amounts of blood on the scene. They were shocked at the amount of blood. I mean, this is a lot of blood for someone that you would think had just simply fallen down the stairs. I mean, it was all over Kathleen. It was pooled on the bottom step, all on the walls. Some blood splatter was up as high as 9.5 feet. Michael was acting very distraught and erratic, the cop said, and he kept saying that his wife had drank a lot that night and taken a Valium, and she must have tripped and fallen down the stairs on her way up to bed. It's always a little sus to me when the last person to see someone alive starts immediately offering up a story and information, especially because Michael was not there when she fell down the stairs, so it's like you don't even know that to be certain. The police note that most of the blood has already begun to dry, which insinuated to them that this incident happened a while ago, and immediately they're thinking that Michael's story is just not making sense with the physical evidence that they're looking at, and they start treating Michael like a suspect pretty much right away. And like I said, he was the last person to see Kathleen alive, which never looks good for anyone. So 11 days later, on December 20th, they arrested Michael Peterson with first-degree murder charges. But he maintains his innocence, and all 5 of his kids think that he's innocent as well. And even Kathleen's family believes that this has to be some kind of misunderstanding. There's no way Michael did this to Kathleen. In February of 2002, Kathleen's autopsy was finally released. She was found to have contusions and lacerations all over her body that just didn't make sense with an accidental fall. She had 7 deep lacerations on the back of her scalp, but there was no evidence of skull fractures or brain bleeding. Her toxicology report came back and said that her blood alcohol level was a 0.07, which is really not that much. At that point, you're still legally able to drive. And she did have Valium in her system, but it was a very normal dose. In light of all of this, the medical examiner concluded that this was not an accidental fall, it was a homicidal beating. The family could not believe what they were hearing, especially Candace, Kathleen's sister. She was fully convinced that Michael did not do this. This was some horrible misunderstanding until she saw those autopsy photos. Those photos changed her mind immediately. She saw all of those weird lacerations and bruises on Kathleen's face, as well as those deep 7 lacerations in the back of Kathleen's skull, and Candace just could not shake that. She changed her mind and said that no, this was not an accident. There's no way these injuries came from an accident. At this point, Caitlin, Kathleen's daughter, had also changed her mind, and she was starting to think that foul play was involved in her mother's death. With a search warrant, the police scoured the Peterson home looking for anything that could be a murder weapon. They were thinking that based on Kathleen's injuries, it had to be something cylindrical and very lightweight because she didn't have skull fractures, so they were like, it couldn't have been a heavy object that Michael hit her with. And that's when it hit Candace. Candace remembered that she had given her sister a very unique blow poke, which is just like a fireplace tool. She had given that to her sister as a gift. She thought this fit the police's description perfectly, so she immediately relayed that information to them, and they agreed. They thought that a blow poke definitely could have been the murder weapon, so they were on a hunt for that blow poke. After an extensive search, the police came up with nothing. They could not find that blow poke anywhere, which of course does look a little suspicious. Like, did somebody hide the blow poke? Couldn't find the murder weapon, but they did find some other interesting information. In Michael's office, they found stacks of male pornography, as well as some email exchanges between Michael and a male sex worker. The correspondence between the two was basically Michael trying to meet up with this male sex worker and pay him for his services. They also discovered a few tiny drops of blood on the back of those printed pornographic photos, and Michael's office was about 60 feet from the crime scene, so that was just very interesting. The police confiscate the computer and they find evidence that Michael had attempted to delete a lot of files, and they also found over 2,500 explicit male photos on Michael's computer, so that just didn't really look great. The detectives start digging a little bit deeper and come to find out this seemingly wealthy family was actually broke. Michael had not been bringing in any money for the past 2 years. His novels weren't making any money, and the couple had $143,000 in credit card debt. They also had 3 kids in college at the time, and the 2 boys, Clayton and Todd, were needing financial assistance. So stress was probably pretty high in their marriage and in their family in general. Kathleen was the sole provider at this point, and her company had been making a lot of cuts, and Kathleen was a little bit worried that she was going to be next. On July 1st, 2003, so about a year and a half after the crime, Michael's trial finally begins, and there is 2 clear sides to this. The state is going for a first-degree murder charge, and Michael and his team are going for accidental death. They don't want Michael to get any time at all. Prosecution is saying that Michael's motive for killing Kathleen could have been Kathleen discovering Michael's bisexuality, their finances, or a combination of the two. If you remember from earlier, Kathleen divorced her first husband because of his infidelities, and the prosecution knew that the night that Kathleen died, she had actually used Michael's computer. She didn't do this very often, but she had left her laptop at her office and she was waiting on a work email. So they're proposing the theory that Kathleen uses Michael's computer. She gets on there, she sees all of the explicit photos, she finds the emails, and she is just so upset, understandably so. If this is the situation, I would be upset too. So Kathleen confronts Michael, and Michael becomes enraged because Kathleen is threatening him with a divorce, and Michael has no money right now. Remember, he's not making any money from his novels, so Kathleen is his only source of income, and without her, he has nothing. So they're proposing that Michael freaks out and beats Kathleen to death, tries to make it look like an accident, because Kathleen also had a very hefty life insurance policy of over $1 million. I saw anywhere from 1.4 million to 1.8 million, but the point is it was a lot of money, and that could have been very beneficial to Michael. And also, like, how many times have we heard of a true crime case where life insurance money was the motive? Just saying. The defense counters this theory and says that there was no way Michael's bisexuality could have been a part of Kathleen's death at all, because Michael says Kathleen knew about this. He says that Kathleen knew that he was bisexual, and it just wasn't something that they ever talked about. She kind of just like turned her head to it in a way. However, Candace, Kathleen's sister, says that 100% there is no chance that Kathleen knew about Michael's bisexuality, because, as I said earlier, Kathleen divorced her first husband because he cheated on her. So Kathleen doesn't mess around with cheaters, whether it was with a man or a woman or whoever. She does not mess around with that. Candace is saying, absolutely no way my sister knew about this. And then some very interesting information comes to light. When Michael was married to his first wife, they lived in Germany for a while Michael was in the Marines, and they befriended a couple named George and Elizabeth Ratliff. The Ratliffs had 2 daughters named Margaret and Martha Ratliff. I'm sure you're wondering, okay, how did Michael end up adopting these 2 young girls? Well, unfortunately, George Ratliff passed away in 1983 from a heart attack, and just 2 years later, in 1985, Elizabeth Ratliff died in a eerily similar way to Kathleen Peterson. Elizabeth was found dead at the bottom of her stairs. Weird. Elizabeth and her 2 daughters were neighbors with the Petersons, so they had gone over to the Petersons for dinner on the night that Elizabeth died. After they had dinner and hung out for a bit, Michael walked all of the girls home, Elizabeth and her 2 daughters. He walked them home because they lived just right down the street. Michael was the last one to see Elizabeth alive. The following morning, the Ratliff girls' nanny comes over, and she's the one that discovers Elizabeth dead at the bottom of the stairs in a pool of blood. Michael catches wind of this news and he immediately rushes over. He's the one that calls 911. And it said that Michael just kind of takes over the scene as if he lives there and knew exactly what happened. He calls the police. The police arrive, and Michael tells them that Elizabeth had been getting a lot of headaches lately, so it's possible that she got really dizzy going up the stairs and just fell backwards and died. The police took a look around, but they didn't see any sign of forced entry, so they kind of just took Michael at his word and they ruled it an accidental death. So with this new story brought forward in the trial, the prosecution wanted to exhume Elizabeth Ratliff's body to do an autopsy again, but in order to exhume her, they needed the permission from Margaret and Martha Ratliff. So the girls kind of reluctantly gave permission to exhume their mother's body, but they did this in hopes that exhuming their mother would exonerate Michael, but instead it did the exact opposite. When the medical examiner did the autopsy, she noticed a lot of striking similarities. Not only did these women physically look a lot alike, but their injuries were also extremely similar. Elizabeth Ratliff also had 7 deep lacerations in the back of her skull, and a lot of the lacerations and contusions on their faces were in relatively the same spots. So after the second autopsy was performed on Elizabeth Ratliff, this medical examiner concluded that she also died of a homicide and not an accident. Now, it is worth noting, just to play devil's advocate, that they did use the exact same medical examiner as Kathleen. So it's possible that this medical examiner could have been biased, could have had a predisposition. I'm not saying that she did, but I'm just saying it probably would have been more beneficial to use a completely different medical examiner for Elizabeth Ratliff. In both Kathleen and Elizabeth's death, the cops just could not get over the copious amounts of blood that were present at the scene. The state had a blood specialist named Dwayne Deaver, and he was responsible for conducting blood spatter tests to see if an accident was even possible with this much blood present. Along with the blood spatter test, Dwayne Deaver also tests Michael's clothes for blood. His shorts were completely blood stained, and Dwayne Deaver also found a small spot of blood on the inside of Michael's shorts that was dried. So this led them to believe that Michael must have been standing over Kathleen as he beat her. And this would also explain a bloody shoe print that was found on the back of Kathleen's sweatpants. They were basically saying that Michael stood over Kathleen and was beating her. Kathleen tries to get up at some point, and Michael pushes her down with his shoe and leaves that shoe print. Also worth noting that the police say whenever they arrived on scene, Michael was barefoot. He was not wearing shoes. Although later they did find a pair of tennis shoes that had blood on them. And the shoe print of those shoes with the blood on them also matched the shoe print that was found on Kathleen's sweatpants. So that also looks just a little bit sus. The prosecution also brought up that when Kathleen was discovered, she had strands of her own hair clenched in her fists. And they explained that this happens a lot with victims that are beaten, because they'll be grabbing their head to protect themselves and they pull some of their hair out. So that was their explanation for that. However, like I mentioned earlier, there was no skull fractures or no brain bleeding, and the medical examiner didn't really have an explanation for that. The defense tried to explain that all of the blood spatter came from Kathleen coughing up blood. They had forensic expert Dr. Henry Lee examine the scene, and he said in his professional opinion it looked like an accident, but he could not 100% rule out homicide. There also was no blood present in Kathleen's airway during her autopsy, so that kind of overruled that theory. You can't really cough up blood if you don't have blood in your airway, In a shocking turn of events, the defense was able to bring forward that blowpoke that had been missing for about 1.5 years at this point. They finally found it in the Petersons' basement. It said that the blowpoke was covered in cobwebs and dust, like it hadn't been used in a very long time. To me, I'm like, okay, it's been 1.5 years since this crime and nobody's been inside of that house, so naturally it's gonna accumulate dust and cobwebs in the basement. Maybe that's just me. They said whenever they examined it, there was no blood, hair, or fingerprints on the blowpoke, but the very tip of it, the little pointy tip, was missing. That alone looks suspicious, and it's also not out of the realm of possibility, in my opinion, that this was a murder weapon and then it just was wiped clean and it sat in the basement for 1.5 years. So who knows how much evidence really would be on that if it was used and wiped clean. Finally, on October 10th, 2003, the jury came back with their verdict after 4 days of deliberating, and they found Michael Peterson guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and while his children wept, Michael remained completely stoic. He showed no emotion at all. Margaret, Martha, Clayton, and Todd were all just beside themselves, so distraught they couldn't believe that this was real life. But for Candace and Caitlin, they felt like justice had been served. But we're not quite through yet. In 2009, a former neighbor of the Petersons and former criminal attorney came forward proposing a new theory. He suggests that Kathleen was attacked by an owl walking back inside of her home. She runs inside to get away from the owl and tries to run upstairs, falls backwards, and dies. He said that he had this theory because of those weird shaped lacerations that Kathleen had on her scalp. He said to him they resembled the talons of an owl, which they kind of do, honestly. In addition to the oddly shaped lacerations on Kathleen's scalp, they also found microscopic feathers in that hair that Kathleen had clenched in her hands. There was microscopic feathers on them, which owls have. He really feels like he's onto something with this, and he calls the judge and presents his theory to the judge, and the judge is basically like, yeah, no. That just doesn't sound legit. And that was pretty much the end of that theory. I mean, personally, I can't completely dispute it. Her lacerations do resemble that of a talon, I'll give him that. And also he said that in the state of North Carolina, it has happened before that people have been clawed to death by owls and they die. So he had some evidence to back it up a little bit. And there are some people out there that do believe that this is what happened to Kathleen. My mind also goes back to Elizabeth Ratliff and how her lacerations were so strikingly similar to Kathleen's. It's so to me, like if you're proposing that Kathleen died of an owl attack, you're probably also proposing that Elizabeth did because their injuries were so similar. It just doesn't add up to me. I don't feel like owls were the root of the problem in both of these cases. So unfortunately, the owl theory didn't offer much help for Michael in his case, but another potential break would come for Michael in 2010 when a man that was convicted of first-degree murder back in 1993 was acquitted. Now, this man was basically convicted of murder because there was a very tiny drop of blood on his truck, and his truck was found near the crime scene, and that was literally the only thing linking him to that crime, and so they convicted him of first-degree murder based on that alone. However, after about 20 years and a new look at the case, it was discovered that that tiny drop of blood that convicted that man ended up not being blood at all. Even though a blood specialist testified in court that that tiny spot was blood, it ended up not being blood at all, and he reported in his notes that it was not blood. But then he continued to testify in court that it was blood. Do you want to know who that blood specialist was? Dwayne Deaver, you little rascal. So if you'll remember, he was the blood specialist in Michael Peterson's case as well. So this was huge for the Peterson case. This could be Michael's chance at freedom. It was found that Dwayne Deaver had at least 5 violations on other cases, so his testimony really was not credible at all in any case. But his testimony at the time of the Michael Peterson case was probably a huge reason why Michael was convicted. But Dwayne Deaver could not be trusted anymore, obviously. So the judge grants Michael Peterson a new trial, but the prosecution knows that this time around they have a very weak case without Dwayne Deaver's blood specialist testimony. And also the evidence that they had from the original case had been tampered with and mishandled by Dwayne Deaver, so they weren't even able to retest that for evidence. As of all of this, they know they don't have a very strong case, so they decide to offer Michael Peterson an Alford plea. And an Alford plea is basically a plea bargain, essentially, where the defendant can accept a plea bargain but still maintain their innocence. So they'll accept the plea bargain, but they won't necessarily admit to guilt. Now, the plea bargain was for 86 months with credit for time served, but Michael Peterson had served like 96 and a half months or something like that. So he had already more than done his time for this new plea bargain. He was able to walk out of court on February 24th, 2017, that very day that the plea bargain was accepted, and he was a free man. These days, Michael Peterson still lives in Durham, North Carolina, which is actually like 20 minutes from where I currently live. I actually work in Durham. So that's just super eerie. I'm like, if I ever come across him and like not even known it, I feel like I would know this man's face. But he still lives in the area and he continues to write. He's written a couple novels about his experiences after the trial. Caitlin Atwater and Candace, Kathleen's sister, still believe that Michael was responsible for Kathleen's death. Candace says about all of this that it's not perfect justice, but it's justice. I think they're a little disappointed that Michael Peterson is now a free man, but at the same time, they're also grateful for the time that Michael did have to serve in prison. I did want to mention that I came across a Reddit post that I found very interesting, and I know Reddit's not completely scientific, but I do always find it interesting for theories and things, and I'll link the Reddit post down below. But basically it was an article about an elderly widowed woman who was taking her chairlift down the stairs, and the chairlift got stuck. So she tries to get out of the chairlift and walk, and she trips and falls down the stairs and she dies. And there's a lot of blood, very similar to like Kathleen and Elizabeth's situation. It says in the Reddit thread that when the cops first arrived, they fully believed that this woman had been attacked with a machete. That's how much blood there was. So I just thought that Reddit thread was very interesting, because initially when I saw the crime scene photos and saw how much blood there was, I was thinking absolutely no way that she just fell down the stairs. But this article kind of goes to show that if you hit your head in the right spots, you can bleed quite a lot from a fall down the stairs. Whether this was a tragic accident or not, we may never know, but what we do know is Kathleen was an incredible person that I truly believe this world really needs more of. She just seemed like she was exceptional. She was so brilliant and compassionate and kind and giving, and although she only lived 48 years on this earth, she really spent those 48 years making her life impactful and doing things that mattered to her. And I believe that if she was still here today, she would still be doing those same things. And Michael Peterson still maintains his innocence to this day. I'm not trying to get sued for defamation, so I'm not going to tell you guys what I think, but I have seen many clips of Michael talking about the incident. He just doesn't look very sad to me, honestly, he doesn't. And that's all I'm going to say about it. But let me know your thoughts and theories down below. And if you've seen the new HBO series on this case, also let me know your thoughts on that. I'm very curious about it. Probably going to go start it right now, actually. And I'm actually really excited about these. I was nervous about them, but it looks like they turned out pretty good. So as always, if they are good, then I'll leave the recipe linked down below. And that's going to be it for this week. I am planning on taking next week off, but I'll be back probably the week after that with another true crime dish. Bye, guys.